Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Ferrari are preparing a major floor upgrade for the Bahrain Grand Prix, but rumour has it Fred Vasseur is looking to fast-track the update for this weekend in Suzuka as well. This could be, if Ferrari can pull it off, a major boost for Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, but many other big updates on the day as well, including the white ball livery finally getting revealed, among other liveries hitting the timeline too. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. We're going to start with April Fools because today is, from a media coverage perspective, the worst day of the year, hands down. There was such jokes arriving to the timeline such as this. Now, there was another one that is very interesting. So this is not the new Ferrari livery or like, some sort of special Ferrari livery. This is the Stake, the Sauber, the green car that they have delivered a beautiful livery here, which is a wonderfully marbled ribeye steak kind of in covering the Sauber this year. And what I find funny about this, because, I'm 99.9% sure this is an April Fool's gag. They're not actually going to run with this, although I would be kind of down to see it. But in terms of effort for April Fool's jokes, they have gone kind of next level with it. I mean, look at this from the side. And they also put out, this is the thing that kind of almost sold it, is that Stake put out a 46-second video of the livery. You don't see teams put this much effort into their actual proper livery launch, let alone doing something like this. I guess, look, Stake are the sponsor of the company. They kind of own the team on some level. So it's maybe understandable why they want to go to this kind of big effort to make it a big marketing push for the day. Because I'm pretty sure they're not actually going to rock up with this, bacon-looking Wagyu steak livery for the actual Grand Prix, although maybe it does look kind of nice compared to the green that some people don't especially like. So that was probably the joke of the day, assuming that it is a joke, and I'm pretty sure that it is. It's just, you don't often see things go to quite this extreme to make the point. But we have a real livery to talk about, and that is the White Bull RB21. We got these today, the suits of the fellas. Here's Max Verstappen, and here of course is Yuki Tsunoda going from, it's pretty funny really, because the most recent car that he drove was white, and they've said, alright Yuki, it's still the racing bull, it's not tricky to drive, it still looks the same as the other car. It does look different, and in my opinion it looks absolutely spectacular. I know that people have been asking for this now for years, saying, look, Red Bull, when are you going to bring back the, the Turkey? Obviously, it was intended for Japan 2021, but it was eventually ran in Turkey that year because the Grand Prix didn't happen. When are you going to bring it back, Red Bull? Come on, people have been asking for it now for years. And it's finally happened, and it's pretty spectacular upon arrival. Here's Yuki outside the garage. I mean, his picture outside the garage. There's lots of excitement for this weekend for Yuki. I think, myself and many others are really hoping that it works out well for him, just because, such pressure on home Grand Prix. First time at Red Bull Racing. The car's clearly tricky to drive. Will he do a better job than Lawson, than Perez, after many of us have believed over the last couple of years that he would? I guess time will tell, but here is the RB21 White Bull livery, and this to me is absolutely spectacular. I think compared to even the one they had in 2021, this is better to me, hands down. I think it's cleaner. I'm a big fan of the cleaner liveries. I still don't massively care for liveries, but I will say this is beautiful, and the fact that it's just red, white, and black, it just doesn't get any better than this. I prefer it to the one that is on the Racing Bulls this year, and arguably that's the best livery on the grid this season, but it's just super clean and straightforward. The number one, the way that it's written here, clearly like a Japanese special livery as well. Of course, it's based on the Honda partnership, but the way they've done it is just so tidy. I like the fact that it's the 22 car here as well, of course, Tsunoda's car for the weekend in this render. The red is just such a gorgeous shade of red. I don't know. I actually think this looks spectacular. I don't know how it's going to look on track, of course, but I think Red Bull have killed it with this. Just the simple colours. Just love it. I like the fact that the old school Honda in the background is the number 11, of course, Perez's number 22, Tsunoda's number, and people have said, well, 11, 22, how about 33, of course, Max Verstappen's old number, although right now he's racing with number 1, as we know, but yeah, some other angles of the car. As I say, these are renders. What it actually looks like in reality and on the track is a different question, because, I mean, the shade of white, is it going to be the same white? Because it seems like a slightly more metallic, shiny white than what they've used on the Racing Bull. This is the Racing Bull up top, and the Racing Bull is lovely, but as I say, there's lots of colours going on. There's a bit of blue in there. Of course, you've got the yellow of the Red Bull as well. The red isn't quite as sexy as the one they've got on the actual Red Bull, in my opinion. So, they will be able to be differentiated on track. I guess that is one of the key points. Speaking of Yuki, though, of course, he's in the car, and he did say something rather interesting, that Bahrain last year was a bit of a turning point for his career. You guys may remember that after that Grand Prix finished, Yuki understandably wasn't very happy with the strategy call that Racing Bulls had made, and whoever is happy with a Racing Bulls strategy, AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, whatever, the same situation applies. Yuki was asked to yield to Danny Rick. Ricciardo was gone ahead, and did Ricciardo really do any damage further up the grid? No, and Yuki wasn't very happy about it, and you guys probably remember that he did this dive bomb down the inside of, is it turn 6, turn 7, whatever it is, towards the end of the first sector, and Ricciardo was like, what's this guy doing? And Tsunoda, unfortunately for him at the time, you've got the likes of Helmut Marko who are trying to gas him up and say, look, Yuki, he's come a long way. He's definitely improving in terms of his temperament. And then the first Grand Prix of the year, he sends a dive bomb after the Grand Prix's over on the cooldown lap. So that was a pretty key moment for many to say, well, maybe Yuki's hot-headed nature hasn't left him after all. But as Yuki says, that was a critical moment for him, because he says, I had to change my approach for the future after what's happened with Daniel in Bahrain last year. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sticking around in F1. So it seems like that was a key moment for Yuki to say, okay, I actually do need to get on top of this, otherwise Red Bull are never going to give me the chance. And frankly, they tried not to, but they eventually now have done. Yuki's goal, of course, is to finish on the podium. He did say in a BBC interview, though, today, that if he finishes in the points, he'll be happy enough. I think, points scored, given the circumstances around the team, that is a reasonable and respectable result for Tsunoda as it stands, and he'll, of course, be hoping for a bit better. There was also talk as well that effectively Horner has told Yuki, just be as close to Max as you possibly can be. I think there's a feeling, really, that maybe there's been a discussion internally at Red Bull, we don't want to have anyone who's going to be able to be too competitive with Max or whatever, but I think the way the car currently is, that's incredibly unlikely. So I think Red Bull can be pretty safe to say to Yuki, look, just be as fast as you possibly can be. If you want to play around with your own setups, that's fine. Just be as close to Max as you can get away with. And Yuki even said that if he was, let's say, leading Max during the course of a Grand Prix, there's not necessarily the implication that he would have to yield. But, I mean, let's be honest, it's Red Bull, and they're fighting for the Drivers' Championship this year, not really the Constructors. So I'm sure they probably would get on the radio. But it's something to mention anyway that Red Bull, at least from the outside looking in, are taking a slightly different approach with Yuki. But I'm not really sure how that's going to transpire when we actually get to the track in just a couple of days' time. And that's what Red Bull are saying, is that Tsunoda's basically being told just to maximise the strategy that we currently have, even if that is going to lean Verstappen's way. Now, speaking of Tsunoda's predecessor, if it's even that even works, Sergio Perez. Rumour has it he may be going to Cadillac next year, and certainly the start to the season at Lawson has had, and who knows what happens with Yuki, has thrown Perez right back into the conversation, right? Because after a solid 2021, if nothing spectacular, but certainly some important moments, 2022 was okay, then it really fell off a cliff halfway through 23, and then 24 was pretty much a complete disaster. But Perez is being recognised to say, okay, maybe he wasn't as bad as we thought he was, and let's be honest here, Perez maintains that Red Bull seat for a very long time, longer than many, including myself, expected, and part of that was, we think, the monetary, the financial, the sponsorship revenue that Perez brings to the table, and that's not exactly gone away, even though now he's out of the Red Bull Racing family. So Checo was talking to Lawrence Barretto over at Formula One and says, I've been approached by a few teams since Abu Dhabi. Now, whether that's just Formula One teams or whether that's, teams in other categories, for example, IndyCar or elsewhere. I think was it the top guy of Formula E said that you should come and drive Formula E cars. I don't think Perez is going to do that. The idea that a few teams have been talking with Perez in F1, maybe they have a conversation, but probably only a couple would be especially serious about it. We're talking talking to a few parties out there. Once I know all of my options, I will make a decision. And, you know, there's a feeling that maybe Cadillac is the most sensible option because, as Perez says, it's good to be in this position knowing that people are keen on you as a driver. People have short memories in F1. Within a couple of races, they forget what you've done. People realise that my position was not the easiest one in F1. I have done extremely well overall. You know, I'm not sure I would say extremely well, but, you know, respectable enough, I guess, on the grand scheme of his tenure at Red Bull, and probably puts himself in the conversation to get another drive elsewhere in 2026, given all of the other factors here in play. He does say that he's a little optimistic that Tsunoda can deliver. He says that, yeah, Tsunoda will succeed at Red Bull ahead of his debut. Yuki has the talent, he has the speed, and more than that, you need the mentality to cope with it. I think he has the right mentality and the right attitude to cope with it. So we'll see. I'm really, like, you know, I'm almost a little bit nervous to see how Yuki gets on, because if Yuki gets, like, blown out in Q1, I'm going to be really sad for him. But the pressure, of course, is on, and when the pressure's on, the diamonds rise to the top, or whatever you want to say with a phrase, but you know what I'm trying to say. Now, Suzuka, Jack Doohan, he's still in the car. And this is notable, I would say. There's been a feeling about, well, how long's Doohan going to last? When are they going to put Colapinto in? Given the fact that, you know, Liam Lawson did not last longer than Jack Doohan, which to me would have been a surprise before the season began. But he will be stepping out for the first practice session in Suzuka. Actually, it's going to be Ryo Hirakawa stepping into the team. Makes sense, Japanese driver, Alpine reserve, one of the million reserve drivers that Alpine seem to have. So that's going to be happening the first session there in Suzuka. Before we get to the Ferrari stuff, quick comment on McLaren really, because this triple header upcoming is going to be a critical weekend to show us. Is the championship fight going to be between Max and Lando, or Max, Lando and Oscar? Can Ferrari get back in the mix? That's a crucial question. Where's George Russell going to end the stint, and even maybe Antonelli, but certainly Mercedes? Or is it going to be a dominant triple header for McLaren, and it becomes pretty clear that the title fight this year is going to be between the two McLaren drivers? Now, Jacques Villeneuve gave his perspective on, let's say, team orders over there, because, of course, last year it got kind of sketchy, Hungary, among other examples. But rumour has it, at least Jacques Villeneuve believes, that McLaren have a contract with Oscar which prevents them giving Lando priority, as it were. Now, I'm sure that it's possible, if the championship is out of reach for one of the drivers, to ask the other driver to help in terms of the drivers' championship bid. You know, that even happened last year. It happens every year when a similar situation arises. But supposedly that will not be the case for a very long time, which is obviously good for Oscar. And Oscar's been very adamant about this to the press as well. This is an exclusive just a couple of days ago from the Times on, you know, Friday 28th of March, when Oscar makes it pretty clear that he's not here to be a number 2 driver. He's here to try and win the world championship and do what it takes to beat and be the very best. So it's going to be a fascinating battle. Of course, I'm hoping that one of at least the Ferrari boys, George Russell, Max as well, can potentially get in the mix for this year's championship, but in all likelihood it's going to be one of the McLaren boys that win. My money would still be on Lando, but Piastri has been more impressive so far than I think Lando would have hoped that he would have been. So I think the next few rounds are going to be particularly telling on that. But whether Ferrari can actually get back into the mix does depend on upgrades they bring to their cars, because clearly the car isn't good enough right now. Even Hamilton winning the sprint in Suzuka, or in China, sorry, Leclerc after that race said that, or after the weekend I think it was, said that, yeah, Hamilton just outperforms the car. It shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have been able to win that race. And then they turn up to the main Grand Prix. They make a couple of changes, and clearly not super clued in Ferrari on what the changes are going to do, or like the benefits and costs of making some of the decisions they did, because, you know, they make a couple of changes. The car gets worse, certainly for Hamilton during the Grand Prix. Now, the simulator work will be crucial to understand what the car is currently doing. They're so far behind in points already, but it's not over. It's a very, very long championship. We're 2 rounds in. We have 22 rounds to go. Like, there's plenty of time for Ferrari to bring this back, but it will need to start relatively quickly, and they're going to need to get on top of their problems rather swiftly indeed. It was probably inevitable that Ferrari, given the changes they made to the front suspension and everything, would suffer some, you know, things not being perfect, but they need to fix them fast if they want to actually compete. So they've got a new simulator model of the SF25 to improve its race performance. They've got data from the Chinese Grand Prix that shows the car performs better with a lower fuel load and at a lower ride height. So it is interesting. I guess expect Ferrari to be competitive in the sprints this year, of which there are 5 more, but in the race, of course, they can change the ride height between sprint and Grand Prix, and in the Grand Prix, the race is longer, the fuel, the plank wear is greater, the fuel load is higher, so, you suffer more with the issues that Hamilton was disqualified for after that Grand Prix and in Austin a couple of years ago. But in the sprint, and you can now change the car setup between the sprint and the Grand Prix, they can probably get away with that, and presumably therefore in qualifying they can also benefit on those weekends. But when it comes down to having to run the car at a ride height that's a bit higher for Grand Prix qualifying in the main Grand Prix, it's not going to be as ideal. Apparently during Bahrain testing they didn't really push the car to the limits, they didn't get the data that they necessarily wanted to. Of course, Hamilton had that issue on the final afternoon, the hydraulic problem, which prevented him from getting a good race run in, and there's a belief that there's a significant data gap in their present understanding, and they're really trying to understand a bit more in Suzuka. They want to improve the platform stability and the aerodynamic mechanical balance, especially in Suzuka's demanding first sector. But the key point is as follows, because we know that they've got an upgrade in the works. It's a floor upgrade, a brand new floor that Ferrari are bringing to their car, and they're hoping that it's going to solve this issue of not being able to run the car at the ride height that they want to, because the rear gets too unstable if they raise it too high, and if they go too low, then the plank wears too much and they get disqualified. Neither of which are optimal scenarios. So they've got a big floor upgrade in the works. They're hoping that it's going to at least temper, if not entirely solve, this primary issue that we just mentioned. And it was planned for Bahrain, but rumour has it that Vasseur is going to try everything in the book to get it ready for Suzuka. Now this would be, a serious effort, to be fair, because presumably they're designing and manufacturing it over there in Maranello in Italy. It's not exactly an hour's drive, right, from there. It's an effort to get the thing to Suzuka in time, especially because today is Tuesday and Friday is first practice. Thursday is obviously the day they're trying to set some things up. So it shows that there is clearly some, very motivated people at Ferrari trying to say, well, if we could get it in Suzuka, not Bahrain, then we'd get much more evidence whether it's going to be working in the way that we intend it to or not. Of course, bringing these upgrades earlier is always better, but they were targeting Bahrain. They now think that it might be possible to do it for Suzuka, which shows that they think it's going to be a crucial upgrade, but also shows that they really know they need to bring performance now and quickly, because who knows, at the end of the season, Ferrari might make a big comeback. They might lose the championship by 5-10 points. If they bring the upgrade this weekend in Suzuka, it may be the big difference maker when it comes down to who eventually wins the World Championship. So intrigued to your perspective in the comments below, but reportedly Ferrari are going to try their best to get all of that stuff ready in time. How much difference is it actually going to make? Do Ferrari fully understand everything? Because we know that Red Bull, they talk about their upgrades arriving in Imola and stuff like this, but they've also talked over the last couple of years about struggles that they have had when it comes to their correlation between the data in the simulator and what actually arrives on the track itself. And Red Bull have suffered the consequences of that to some degree over the last couple of seasons. Ferrari need to make sure that with the substantial changes they made to this year's car with the pull rods, front suspension, they don't find themselves in a similar position. Just one final word really on Aston Martin, because when Pablo Montoya made an interesting assessment that he believes at some point Verstappen is going to get an offer that he simply cannot refuse. I mean, we talked about the $1 billion pound offer, whatever, Aston Martin might try and pay Max over several years, I imagine, to get him to come along. Montoya says that when that happens, Fernando will retire and become an ambassador. Now, I'm sure that Fernando wants to drive in 2026 with the new car, obviously, in the Honda engine. But if that doesn't work out, you cannot rule out this possibility. And especially when Lawrence Stroll is continuing to commit more resources. I think he actually, he invested a substantial amount more money into the company, buying back some of the shares to such an extent now that Aston Martin, as a brand, they still sponsor the team and everything, but in terms of ownership in the team, I think that stake has been, reduced very small anyway by the top dog, who is obviously making the decisions over there and is increasing his stake and control of the team to such an extent that more than likely Lance Stroll ain't going anywhere anytime soon. But very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.